Hello, and welcome to Lean Reads, the channel that turns powerful books into simple lessons for growth and inspiration. Energy has always shaped human history, from coal to oil, from oil to code. But now, the map is being redrawn once again. Daniel Yergin takes us on a journey across continents, revealing how nations rise and fall, not by weapons, but by watts. This is the new map, where geopolitics meets the energy of tomorrow. If you'd like to read the full book, the link is waiting for you in the description. Now let's jump into it. The new map, published in 2020, analyzes how the global balance of power is being reshaped under the combined forces of energy, geopolitics, climate change, and international conflict. The book highlights several key dynamics: the rise of U.S. shale oil, the strategic role of Russian natural gas, China's expanding global influence, the Middle East's adaptation to the era of lower oil prices, and the rapid advance of green technology and renewable energy. Through these interconnected stories, Daniel Yergin paints a sweeping portrait of the global energy transition and how it is redrawing the map of power, economy, and influence in the 21st century. Daniel Yergin is one of the world's leading authorities on global energy and geopolitics. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Prize, The Epic Quest for Oil, Money, and Power, and currently serves as vice chairman of S&P Global. Yergin is also the founder of Cambridge Energy Research Associates, Sierra, one of the most influential energy think tanks in the world. For more than 4 decades, he has shaped global understanding of the intricate links between energy, economics, and political power. In 2014, when Russian tanks rolled into Crimea, Europe was forced to confront an alarming reality. Nearly 40% of the continent's natural gas was transported through pipelines running across Ukraine and originated from Russia itself. Energy, long seen as a simple input for consumption and production, suddenly revealed its deeper dimension, a tool of global power. The events in Crimea were not only a geopolitical turning point, but also a striking demonstration of how natural resources continue to reshape the modern world map. In this book, readers embark on a global journey that begins with the American Shale Revolution. This transformation didn't just upend global energy markets, it also elevated America's geopolitical position, giving Washington a new form of strategic leverage. Meanwhile, Russia has long used its vast network of natural gas pipelines as a political lever. China, on the other hand, seeks to safeguard its vital energy corridors through the Belt and Road Initiative, a vast infrastructure network spanning Eurasia. In the Middle East, the traditional oil powers are investing billions of dollars to diversify their economies, preparing for a future in which the world gradually moves away from oil. Most importantly, climate policies are compelling nations to rethink the very nature of energy power. As renewable energy becomes the new global norm, countries that once dominated thanks to traditional resources now face the urgent challenge of transformation. Those that fail to adapt risk losing the strategic advantage they have held for decades, and in this process, the global economic map itself is being redrawn. During the Great Depression, George Mitchell, the son of Greek immigrants, watched his parents struggle to keep their small shoe shine business alive. Those difficult years instilled in him a relentless entrepreneurial spirit. Mitchell devoted his entire career to pursuing his fascination with natural gas, spending decades perfecting the technology of hydraulic fracturing, a method that could unlock vast stores of energy trapped deep within layers of shale rock. Unlike coal, which lies in relatively accessible geological seams, oil and gas in shale formations are locked deep underground, encased within extremely hard rock structures. Mitchell began experimenting by combining two technologies, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. In this process, a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals is pumped into the well at high pressure to crack the rock and release the trapped gas. The early results were disappointing. The wells produced little, while extraction costs were painfully high. By the early 2000s, the United States had almost abandoned its dream of energy independence, preparing instead to become a major importer of natural gas from the Middle East and other producing regions. But continuous technological improvement would soon change everything. Natural gas output began to surge from shale formations such as Marcellus in Pennsylvania and Barnett in Texas. Soon, engineers discovered that the same method could also be used to extract oil, breathing new life into regions once thought to be depleted. New energy frontiers emerged: Bakken in North Dakota and Eagle Ford in Texas, sparking population booms and rapid economic growth in once quiet towns. By 2015, American manufacturing was reaping major benefits as industrial electricity prices were 30 to 50% lower than in Europe or Asia, a powerful new competitive edge. However, the revolution was not without controversy. Environmental and social concerns soon provoked fierce debate. In 2008, when TransCanada proposed the Keystone XL pipeline to transport oil sands from Alberta to Nebraska, it faced intense opposition. Then, in 2016, thousands of protesters, led by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, camped out near the Dakota Access Pipeline, defending their water sources and drawing global attention to the broader consequences of the shale boom. On the international stage, the shale revolution fundamentally altered the global energy balance. The United States began exporting natural gas to Europe, to countries like Poland and Lithuania, helping them reduce dependence on Russian supplies. In response, Saudi Arabia flooded the market with oil in 2014 and again in 2020, driving prices sharply downward in an effort to make U.S. shale production economically unviable. The impact rippled further, putting immense pressure on oil-dependent economies such as Iran and Venezuela, whose revenues collapsed alongside global oil prices. Ultimately, the American shale revolution revealed a profound truth. Innovation in energy can reshape global power structures. As nations compete for dominance in this new era of energy transformation, the story of the United States stands as both a technological milestone and a powerful lesson in how ingenuity can redraw the world's geopolitical map. Throughout the 20th century, Russia's position on the global stage shifted dramatically. From its days as a Soviet superpower to the collapse and chaos of the 1990s, and finally its resurgence under Vladimir Putin, the country experienced profound transformation. Amid all this upheaval, one constant remained: Russia's immense natural resource wealth, particularly its vast reserves of natural gas. Under Putin's leadership, energy especially gas, became both an economic engine and a geopolitical weapon. Gas as a geopolitical lever. The central role of energy in Russia's strategy is best illustrated by its complex relationship with Ukraine. The state-controlled giant Gazprom, holder of the world's largest natural gas reserves, cut gas supplies to Ukraine in 2006 and again in 2009, citing pricing disputes. Because much of Russia's gas exports to Europe pass through Ukraine's pipeline network, these disruptions exposed a deep vulnerability in Europe's energy security. The message was unmistakable. Moscow could influence not only its neighbors, but an entire continent through the turn of a valve, Nord Stream, and the bypassing of transit states. In 2011, Russia moved to reduce its reliance on traditional transit routes by completing the Nord Stream pipeline, which runs under the Baltic Sea, delivering gas directly to Germany while bypassing intermediary nations. The project sparked heated debate within the European Union. Western European countries, especially Germany, viewed it as a practical partnership ensuring stable energy supplies. Eastern European states, however, saw it as a strategic trap, fearing it would make Europe ever more dependent on Russian energy. Europe's countermoves and Russia's leverage. In 2009, the European Union, EU, began efforts to counterbalance Russia's influence by constructing interlinked gas networks among member states and accelerating investment in renewable energy. Yet, Russian gas remained vital to Europe's industrial base, particularly to Germany's manufacturing economy. By 2013, Moscow leveraged this dependence to pressure Ukraine into withdrawing from an association agreement with the EU, offering discounted gas and generous loans in exchange. Nord Stream 2 and the eastward pivot. The announcement of Nord Stream 2 in 2015 deepened divisions within Europe. Germany continued to support the project, despite mounting opposition from the United States, Poland, and Ukraine. While Europe fractured over the issue, Russia turned eastward, signing major gas supply agreements with China and investing heavily in liquefied natural gas, LNG, infrastructure to serve Asian markets. By diversifying its customer base, Moscow aimed to ensure that its energy exports would remain a cornerstone of influence, even as Western demand evolved. The new landscape of Russian energy. By 2020, new dynamics were reshaping Russia's place in the global energy game. Its vast gas reserves and strategic pipeline network still granted it considerable influence in Europe. However, the U.S. shale boom had introduced a powerful new competitor, flooding the global market with alternative energy supplies. At the same time, China's surging demand drew Russia further into Asia's energy orbit, while Europe's green transition steadily reduced reliance on fossil fuels. In response, Moscow began constructing new energy corridors across Asia, seeking stability and strategic balance as its European strategy grew increasingly uncertain. Power lies in both supply and demand. Russia's experience reveals a central truth of energy geopolitics. Even the world's largest natural resources only translate into power when a country controls both the flow of supply and the loyalty of its markets. Energy is not simply a commodity, it is a currency of influence. And in the 21st century, Russia continues to wield it as one of the most formidable instruments of statecraft. The meteoric rise of China as an economic superpower has reshaped the global balance of power. Together with the United States, China now accounts for roughly 40% of global GDP and half of the world's military spending. Since joining the World Trade Organization, WTO, China has rapidly become the factory of the world, producing everything from smartphones and computers to industrial machinery on an unprecedented scale. Yet behind this remarkable economic ascent lies a critical vulnerability: China's deep dependence on foreign energy supplies. A nation powered by imports, unlike the United States, which has strengthened its energy security through the shale revolution, China remains heavily reliant on imported oil. Today, around 75% of its oil consumption comes from abroad. This dependence makes the country's maritime energy routes, particularly those passing through the South China Sea, vital strategic choke points for its economy. The South China Sea is not only one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, carrying nearly one-third of all global liquefied natural gas (LNG) trade, but also a region rife with territorial disputes involving China and its neighbors. The result is a volatile intersection of energy security and diplomacy, where national interests frequently collide. The Malacca Dilemma, one of the clearest symbols of China's energy anxiety, is the so-called Malacca Dilemma. The Strait of Malacca, the narrow channel between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra, serves as China's primary lifeline for imported oil and gas. Because so much of China's energy must pass through this vulnerable corridor, Beijing fears that in the event of a conflict, it could be blockaded or disrupted. This vulnerability has become a driving force behind China's long-term energy and security strategy. Since joining the WTO, China's oil consumption has surged by over 250%, far outpacing domestic production capacity. Meanwhile, untapped oil and gas reserves in the South China Sea have fueled further tension, including exploration confrontations dating back to as early as 1981. The Belt and Road Initiative, building energy corridors. To mitigate these vulnerabilities, Beijing launched an ambitious global strategy, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Through this program, China has financed dozens of ports, pipelines, and power plants across Asia, Africa, and beyond. But the BRI is more than just an infrastructure plan. It is also a blueprint for alternative energy corridors. By building oil and gas pipelines through Pakistan and Myanmar, China shortened its transport routes and reduced dependence on the Strait of Malacca. At the same time, massive energy infrastructure investments in Central Asia have opened access to resources from Russia and Kazakhstan. Chinese-funded ports, stretching from Greece to Sri Lanka, now form a vast network, enabling China to diversify its energy import pathways, extending its energy reach across continents. Redrawing the energy map. This strategy could fundamentally reshape the global energy map. As China develops overland energy corridors and deepens partnerships with resource-rich nations from Iran to Angola, the traditional sea-based trade routes that once defined global commerce may gradually diminish in importance. Yet China's ambitions extend beyond oil and gas. The country is also investing heavily in renewable energy and clean technology, not only to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels, but to seize leadership in the emerging green technology economy that will define the next century. From solar panels and wind turbines to electric vehicles and battery storage, China's move into renewables signals a shift from being merely the world's factory to becoming a global innovator, one that seeks to control both the hardware and the ideology of the energy transition. From dependence to dominance, China's energy stories is one of paradox, a nation that rose to power through fossil fuel dependence, now racing to free itself from it. Through massive infrastructure investments, geopolitical alliances, and green innovation, China is striving not just to secure energy, but to define the future of it. In this unfolding narrative, the Belt and Road Initiative is more than a trade network. It is China's way of repainting the map of global power, one pipeline, one port, and one solar panel at a time. The Middle East, a region whose modern map was drawn around the axis of oil, has long been the heart of the world's energy story. In 1916, the Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France carved up the Ottoman Empire, not merely along political lines, but with an eye toward securing access to petroleum resources. British officials drew borders on maps that ensured control over key oil reserves, a strategy aimed at reducing reliance on supplies from the United States. From those strategically drawn boundaries emerged new nations such as Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, countries endowed with immense oil wealth and fates bound to what became known as black gold. Oil and the politics of power. At the center of the region's energy politics stood Saudi Arabia, the largest producer in OPEC, and Iran. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 upended this balance when a pro-Western monarchy was replaced by an Islamic republic hostile to U.S. interests. Oil quickly became both an economic weapon and a theater of conflict. Iran threatened to block the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passageway through which nearly one-third of the world's traded oil flows, while Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, attacked Iran's oil facilities. The Gulf Wars that followed not only caused immense human suffering, but also sent shockwaves through global markets, reminding the world of the Middle East's fragile energy stability, nuclear ambitions, and sanctions. Global anxiety deepened as Iran pursued a nuclear program, raising the prospect of a state armed with nuclear weapons, also controlling one of the world's most critical oil routes. In response, Western nations imposed severe sanctions, targeting Iran's oil exports, the lifeblood of its economy. These sanctions cut Iran's crude exports from 2.5 million barrels per day to around 1 million, destabilizing its economy. Meanwhile, the U.S. shale revolution helped offset the global supply gap left by Iran, diminishing its leverage. Under this pressure, Iran agreed to the 2015 nuclear deal, JCPOA, which allowed it to restore some oil exports. But in 2018, the Trump administration withdrew from the accord, reimposing sanctions and reigniting tensions. In response, Iran sought to strengthen regional influence, deepening ties with Iraq and promoting what it called a resistance axis, a network of political and military alliances aimed at countering U.S. pressure. Economic reinvention. Amid falling oil prices, beyond politics, the oil market itself underwent dramatic shocks. In 2014, oil prices collapsed, forcing major producers across the Middle East to confront the unsustainability of their economic models. Competition from U.S. shale oil and a global shift toward clean energy in response to climate change accelerated the need for transformation. In 2016, Saudi Arabia unveiled its ambitious Vision 2030, a blueprint to diversify the economy, invest in technology, and expand tourism. At the same time, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, invested billions into renewable energy, commissioning the world's largest solar power plant in 2019. By 2020, oil dependent nations across the region were actively restructuring their economies in preparation for a post oil future, a daunting but necessary adaptation in an era of rapid global transition. Energy and transportation have long been inseparable. For over a century, fossil fuels have powered the cars, ships, and airplanes that drive the global economy. But that relationship is now being redefined by a new wave of technological innovation. The rise of Tesla marked a turning point for the electric vehicle (EV) industry. The company proved that battery-powered cars were not only feasible but also commercially attractive, igniting a global race among automakers to electrify transportation. The battery breakthrough. The key lies in the lithium-ion battery, which at first glance resembles those in smartphones, but is vastly more powerful and durable. Thanks to advances in engineering and large-scale manufacturing, battery costs have fallen by nearly 90% in a decade, while storage capacity and lifespan have dramatically improved. At the same time, governments from China to Norway introduced generous subsidies and incentives, reducing the higher upfront cost of EVs. Although electric cars still face challenges, such as limited range and insufficient charging infrastructure, their popularity is soaring, driven by rising environmental awareness and steadily declining prices. Autonomous and shared mobility transformation extends beyond electric motors. In 2004, the U.S. military's DARPA Grand Challenge invited innovators to design autonomous vehicles capable of crossing the Mojave Desert, laying the foundation for today's self-driving technology. Tech giants like Waymo and Cruise are now testing driverless cars on city streets, while ride-hailing platforms such as Uber and Lyft are redefining car ownership, shifting mobility from possession to on-demand access. Traditional automakers have been forced to adapt rapidly. After its diesel emissions scandal, Volkswagen committed billions of dollars to developing EVs. General Motors, GM, announced plans to phase out gasoline engines entirely, while Ford is investing heavily in both EVs and autonomous driving technologies. Even oil majors, such as BP and Shell, are transforming their business models, installing EV charging stations at fuel stops once reserved solely for gasoline and diesel. A shift in the global energy order. This transformation could redraw the global energy landscape. Nations rich in lithium and rare earth elements, key materials for batteries and electronic components, stand poised to rise in strategic importance. Conversely, countries long dependent on oil exports face growing pressure to adapt or risk decline. Transportation accounts for nearly 1/4 of global energy consumption, making this transition pivotal to the future of fossil fuels. By 2020, progress was undeniable, yet the majority of vehicles worldwide still ran on oil. The revolution had begun, but the journey toward a new era of clean mobility was only in its first chapter. The world's response to climate change is profoundly reshaping how humanity produces and consumes energy. With fossil fuels currently responsible for about 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions, immense pressure now bears down on the coal-fired power sector, oil-based transportation, and gas-dependent heating systems. The Paris Agreement of 2015 marked a historic turning point as nations collectively pledged to limit global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. To meet this target, many countries have adopted carbon pricing mechanisms, assigning an economic cost to every ton of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere, incentivizing businesses to curb pollution. Two principal methods are widely used: carbon taxes, which impose direct fees based on emissions, and emissions trading systems, in which companies are granted emission allowances they can buy or sell. From China to Canada, such frameworks have expanded rapidly since 2020, signaling a global alignment toward low carbon economies. Yet the greatest challenge remains: how to replace fossil fuels with cleaner, more sustainable sources of energy. Nuclear power and renewables. Promise and paradox: nuclear energy offers a carbon free and reliable power source. However, following disasters such as Fukushima, public fear and political caution have slowed its expansion. Meanwhile, renewable energy has made extraordinary progress. Between 2009 and 2019, the cost of wind power dropped by about 70%, while solar photovoltaic prices plunged nearly 90%. Countries such as Germany and Denmark now generate a large shares of their electricity from wind and solar. Still, renewables face a crucial limitation: intermittency. The sun doesn't always shine, and the wind doesn't always blow. Developing efficient energy storage and grid management systems remains essential for stability in a renewable powered world. Technological breakthroughs on the horizon. Several emerging technologies hold promise for accelerating the clean energy transition. 3D printing, additive manufacturing can cut emissions by enabling local, on demand production that reduces transportation. Carbon capture and storage, CCS technology, offers another path, capturing carbon dioxide from industrial processes or power plants and storing it underground to prevent atmospheric release. By 2020, large scale CCS pilot projects had begun in several countries, though high costs continue to hinder widespread adoption. Nevertheless, these innovations point to a future where technology itself becomes a form of climate diplomacy, a new arena of global competition and cooperation, redefining global energy power. As the rules of the global energy game change, so too do the fortunes of nations. Countries blessed with abundant renewable resources, such as Morocco with its vast solar potential, or Norway with its hydropower, are emerging as potential energy hubs of the future. Meanwhile, China, leveraging its dominance in solar manufacturing and clean tech supply chains, is positioning itself as a strategic leader in the energy transition. The new competition is no longer about controlling oil fields or gas pipelines. It is about mastering the technologies, materials, and supply networks that will underpin a sustainable energy economy. In this new order, power flows not from wells and rigs, but from innovation, efficiency, and global coordination. Daniel Yergin, as the new map, reveals that energy has always shaped the world's balance of power, from the control of oil and gas to the emergence of new technologies that define modern civilization. But today, the landscape is shifting faster than ever. The shale revolution has strengthened U.S. influence, while China's global energy strategy secures its supply lines and geopolitical reach. Across the Middle East, producers are diversifying to survive in a post oil era. At the same time, climate change and the rapid rise of renewable energy are rewriting the rules of global power, shifting the center of influence toward nations rich in sustainable resources and advanced clean technologies. The energy map of the 21st century, Yergin argues, is not merely about geography, it is about adaptation, innovation, and resilience, the new forces that will define prosperity and power in the decades ahead. Reading the new map feels like stepping onto a living atlas, one that captures the shifting tectonic plates of global power, energy, and ambition. Daniel Yergin doesn't just write about oil, gas, or renewables. He writes about how energy shapes civilization itself, how it builds empires, sparks wars, and redefines what it means to be powerful in the 21st century. At its heart, the new map is not a book about resources, but about transformation. It traces the world's movement from an era dominated by fossil fuels, where power was measured in barrels and pipelines, to a new frontier defined by technology, innovation, and carbon neutrality. Through 6 chapters, Yergin guides readers across continents, showing how the American shale revolution, Russia's gas diplomacy, China's global ambitions, and the Middle East's reinvention all intersect in one grand narrative: the race to control the future of energy. What stands out most is Yergin's ability to blend economic insight, political history, and human trauma. George Mitchell's decades-long pursuit of shale gas, Vladimir Putin's use of pipelines as instruments of influence, China's obsession with securing oil routes through the South China Sea. These are not just case studies. They are stories about the human will to adapt, survive, and dominate in a rapidly changing world. The final chapters on climate change and the clean energy transition are both sobering and hopeful. They remind us that the greatest energy revolution is still unfolding, one where innovation replaces extraction and knowledge becomes the new oil. Yergin shows that while nations still compete for dominance, the real battle ahead lies in who can master the science, materials, and technologies that will power a sustainable planet. For me, the new map is a reminder that energy is not merely an economic asset, it is the invisible thread weaving together our environment, politics, and future. It is a story about how power evolves and how humanity must learn, once again, to redraw the map.